the Cilician pirate empire. In 78 BCE, a 25-year-old Roman nobleman was sailing across the Aegean Sea when his ship was intercepted near the island of Pharmacusa. The pirates who seized him demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. The young man laughed in their faces. He told them he was worth at least 50. That nobleman was Julius Caesar, and the men who captured him were not random bandits. They were soldiers of the most powerful pirate fleet the ancient world had ever seen. The Cilician pirates operated from the rugged coastline of southern Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, where jagged cliffs and hidden coves created a natural fortress invisible from open water. By the early 1st century BCE, what had begun as scattered raiding parties had evolved into a fully organized maritime state. Ancient sources describe a fleet exceeding 1,000 warships manned by more than 20,000 fighters. They built dockyards. They maintained signal towers along the coast. They operated a sophisticated intelligence network that tracked Roman merchant convoys weeks before they sailed. Their ships were not crude rafts. Roman historians recorded vessels with gilded sterns, purple sails, and silver-plated oars, designed not just for speed, but for intimidation. They attacked in coordinated squadrons, using wolf-pack tactics centuries before the term existed. Within 2 decades, the Cilicians had seized control of virtually every major shipping lane in the Mediterranean. Grain shipments from Egypt to Rome were intercepted so frequently that food prices in the capital tripled. The Roman Senate received reports that over 400 cities along the Mediterranean coast had been raided or held for ransom. The pirates grew bold enough to strike the Italian coast itself. They kidnapped 2 Roman praetors along with their bodyguards directly from the Appian Way. They raided Ostia, Rome's primary port, burning the consular war fleet while it sat anchored in harbor. The Senate watched its own ships burn from the hills of the capital. For the first time in Roman history, a pirate force had humiliated the Republic on its own doorstep. As for Caesar, he spent 38 days in captivity. According to Plutarch, he exercised with the pirates, read them poetry, and promised he would return to crucify every one of them. They laughed. The moment his ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar assembled a small fleet, tracked the pirates to their anchorage, captured them all, and had them crucified at Pergamon. He kept his word to the letter. But the Cilician network was far larger than one raiding party. It took Rome's most ambitious military operation to end the threat. In 67 BCE, the Senate passed the Lex Gabinia, granting Pompey the great extraordinary command over the entire Mediterranean. He was given 500 warships, 120,000 soldiers, and absolute authority over every coastline within 50 miles of the sea. Pompey divided the Mediterranean into 13 military districts and swept them systematically, driving the pirates eastward toward their strongholds in Cilicia. The final battle took place near Coracesium, off the Anatolian coast. The Cilician fleet was destroyed in a single engagement. The entire campaign lasted just 89 days, but the scale of the operation revealed a truth Rome never publicly acknowledged. It had taken the largest naval mobilization in Roman history, more ships and men than most wars against rival kingdoms, to defeat an enemy the Senate had spent decades dismissing as common criminals. The grain routes reopened, the Senate celebrated, and every record of how close the Cilician pirates came to strangling the Roman Republic was quietly filed away, rewritten as a minor chapter in Pompey's career, rather than what it actually was, proof that an empire could be brought to its knees by men it refused to recognize as a legitimate threat. The Wokou Phantom Fleet. In 1358, a coastal garrison commander in China's Shandong province sent an urgent dispatch to the Ming court. An armada of unknown origin had appeared at dawn, burned 3 port towns to the ground, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. No flags, no insignia, no survivors left to identify the attackers. The dispatch was filed alongside hundreds of identical reports stretching back nearly a decade. The enemy had no name the court was willing to speak aloud. They called them Wokou, the dwarf pirates. And for the next 250 years, no force in East Asia could stop them. The Wokou began as Japanese ronin and coastal raiders who struck Korean and Chinese shorelines in the mid-14th century. But what started as opportunistic plunder evolved into something far more complex. At their peak, the Wokou operated a multinational pirate confederation, spanning the entire coastline from Japan to Southeast Asia. Their fleets numbered in the hundreds. They did not simply rob merchant vessels. They besieged walled cities. They occupied islands. They maintained supply chains, recruited mercenaries, and negotiated trade agreements with local warlords who preferred pirate gold to imperial taxes. The scale of destruction was staggering. Chinese imperial records document over 400 coastal cities and towns attacked between 1350 and 1600. Entire populations were displaced inland. The Ming Dynasty was forced to abandon its own coastline, implementing a radical policy known as the Haijin, a total maritime trade ban that forbade Chinese citizens from sailing beyond territorial waters. The logic was simple. If no one was allowed at sea, the pirates would have nothing to raid. Instead, it destroyed China's merchant class and handed the Wokou a monopoly over East Asian maritime commerce. But here is where the official story fractures. When Ming authorities finally captured Wokou leaders and interrogated them, the records revealed something the court never intended to make public. According to documents from the Jiajing period, compiled by military officials investigating the crisis, approximately 70% of Wokou leadership were not Japanese at all. They were Chinese, merchants, smugglers, and ship owners who had been criminalized by the Haijin ban. Men who had built their livelihoods on maritime trade for generations, suddenly declared outlaws by their own government. They did not become pirates by choice. The empire made them pirates by law. The most powerful among them was Wang Zhi, a Chinese merchant-turned-pirate king who commanded a fleet of over 1,000 ships from a fortified base on the Japanese island of Goto. Wang Zhi controlled trade routes from Nagasaki to the Malay Peninsula. He offered to disband his fleet and restore order to the Chinese coast in exchange for the lifting of the maritime ban. The Ming court invited him to negotiate. When he arrived, they arrested him and had him publicly executed in 1559. The Wokou threat eventually subsided, not because the pirates were defeated, but because the economic conditions that created them shifted. Japan unified under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who cracked down on pirate harbors to consolidate his own naval power. The Ming Dynasty quietly relaxed the Haijin, but the deeper question was never answered. The official history of the Wokou paints them as foreign invaders, barbarian raiders from across the sea. The court's own classified interrogation records tell a different story. The greatest pirate fleet in East Asian history was not an invasion. It was a rebellion, born from an empire that criminalized its own people for daring to trade with the outside world. The Barbarossa Brotherhood. In 1504, a single galley flying no national flag attacked a papal warship off the coast of Elba. The ship was carrying a fortune in gold bound for Rome. The attackers boarded in under 10 minutes, seized the cargo, and disappeared into the North African coastline before any naval response could be mounted. The man who led the raid was a former Greek-born Ottoman sailor named Eruj. He had one arm. He had no navy. He had no state backing. Within 4 decades, his family would command the most feared fleet in the Mediterranean and reshape the balance of power between Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Aruj and his younger brother Hayreddin were born on the island of Lesbos to a Turkish father and a Greek mother. Both went to sea young. Aruj was captured by the Knights of St. John and spent years as a galley slave before escaping. That experience forged something irreversible. He did not return to merchant life. He returned to war. Operating from small harbors along the Tunisian coast, Aruj began raiding Christian shipping lanes with a handful of captured vessels. Each successful raid brought more ships, more men, and more reputation. By 1516, he had amassed enough firepower to seize the city of Algiers from its Spanish-backed ruler, declaring himself Sultan of the Central Maghreb. Spain responded immediately. A massive military expedition was dispatched to retake Algiers. Aruj was killed in battle near Tlemcen in 1518, fighting a rearguard action to allow his forces to escape. His death should have ended the Barbarossa threat. Instead, it multiplied it. Hayreddin inherited his brother's fleet, his territory, and his hatred of European naval power. But where Aruj had been a warlord, Hayreddin was a strategist. He sent envoys to the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent and offered Algiers as an Ottoman province in exchange for military support. Suleiman accepted. In a single diplomatic stroke, Hayreddin transformed himself from a pirate captain into an Ottoman governor backed by the full resources of the most powerful Muslim empire on earth. By 1533, Suleiman appointed Hayreddin Kasudan Pasha, Supreme Admiral of the Ottoman Navy. The former pirate now commanded the largest war fleet in the Mediterranean. He immediately launched a campaign that ravaged the Italian and Spanish coastlines, sacking towns from Naples to the Balearic Islands and capturing thousands of prisoners. European powers scrambled to respond. In 1538, Pope Paul III assembled a Holy League combining the naval forces of Spain, Venice, the Papal States, and the Knights of Malta. Their combined fleet met Hayreddin at the Battle of Preveza off the western coast of Greece. It was not a battle, it was a masterclass. Hayreddin outmaneuvered the Allied fleet, exploiting divisions between the Spanish and Venetian commanders. The Holy League retreated in disarray without mounting a coordinated attack. Preveza gave the Ottoman Empire unchallenged control of the Mediterranean for the next 33 years. Hayreddin retired to Constantinople in 1545, where he died peacefully the following year, honored as one of the greatest admirals in Ottoman history. His tomb still stands on the Bosphorus. Ottoman sailors saluted it every time they passed for centuries afterward. The Barbarossa brothers began as stateless pirates raiding merchant ships from stolen boats. They ended as architects of an empire's naval supremacy. No history book has satisfactorily explained where the pirate ended and the admiral began, because the truth is there was never a line. The only difference between a pirate and a navy was whose flag flew at the mast, and Hayreddin Barbarossa understood that better than any man who ever lived. The Zheng Dynasty fleet. In 1661, a fleet of 400 warships carrying 25,000 soldiers appeared off the southwestern coast of Taiwan. The Dutch garrison at Fort Zeelandia, the most fortified European outpost in East Asia, watched from the ramparts as the horizon filled with sails. The commander of the fleet was not a king. He was not a general appointed by any recognized government. He was the son of a pirate. His name was Zheng Chenggong, known to the West as Koxinga. And he was about to do something no pirate in recorded history had ever done: take an entire colony from a European empire by force. The Zheng family's rise began a generation earlier with Zheng Jilong, a Chinese merchant who built a maritime trading network spanning Japan, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia during the chaotic final decades of the Ming Dynasty. When legitimate commerce became impossible under constant warfare between Ming loyalists and the invading Manchu forces, Zheng Jilong did what the coastline demanded. He armed his merchant fleet. Within a decade, he controlled the most powerful private navy in Asia. At its peak, the Zheng fleet numbered over 3,000 vessels, manned by an estimated 150,000 sailors and soldiers. No European power operating in Asian waters at the time, not the Dutch, not the Portuguese, not the Spanish, could field a naval force even half that size. Zheng Jilong initially allied with the remnants of the Ming court against the Manchu Qing dynasty, but when the Qing offered him wealth and titles in exchange for surrender, he accepted. It was a fatal miscalculation. The Qing arrested him, held him hostage for years, and eventually executed him in Beijing in 1661. His son Koxinga refused to follow the same path. He took command of the family fleet and declared open war against the Qing, using the sea as his battlefield and the coastline as his fortress. The Qing response was extraordinary. Unable to defeat the Zheng fleet at sea, the emperor ordered the complete evacuation of China's southeastern coast. Every village, town, and city within approximately 15 miles of the shoreline was emptied. Millions of civilians were forcibly relocated inland. Crops were burned. Harbors were destroyed. The policy was called the Great Clearance. Its logic was identical to what the Ming had attempted with the Haijin 2 centuries earlier. If the coast was empty, the pirates had no base, no supplies, and no recruits. The human cost was catastrophic. Entire communities that had existed for centuries were erased in months. Koxinga responded by turning his attention to Taiwan. The Dutch East India Company had controlled the island since 1624, operating Fort Zeelandia as a hub for regional trade. Koxinga besieged the fort for 9 months. The Dutch held out waiting for reinforcements that never came. On February 1, 1662, the garrison surrendered. It remains the only recorded instance in history where a pirate fleet captured and held colonial territory from a European imperial power. Koxinga died just months after his victory, likely from malaria. The Zheng family held Taiwan for another 2 decades before the Qing finally conquered the island in 1683. The dynasty that had once commanded the largest fleet in Asia was extinguished. But the question the Zheng story leaves behind is not about military power. It is about classification. The Qing called them pirates. The Ming called them loyalists. The Dutch called them invaders. 3 empires, 3 different labels for the same fleet. The only thing all 3 agreed on was that the Zheng family was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. The Salé Rovers. In 1627, a fleet of corsair ships appeared off the southern coast of Iceland. They anchored in the harbor of a small fishing village called Vestmannaeyjar. The raiders came ashore at dawn, moved through the settlement systematically, and within hours had captured 400 men, women, and children. The captives were loaded onto ships and transported over 2,000 miles south to the slave markets of North Africa. Iceland, one of the most remote inhabited islands in the North Atlantic, had never been raided by any foreign force in its recorded history. The attackers were not from any nation Europe recognized. They came from a pirate republic operating out of a single port city on the Moroccan coast. The city was Salé, and for over a century it answered to no king, no empire, and no law. The Salé Rovers were unlike any pirate fleet in the Atlantic. Their origin was not maritime tradition, but political exile. In the early 17th century, thousands of Moriscos, Muslims expelled from Spain during the final waves of the Reconquista, settled in the Moroccan port cities of Salé and Rabat at the mouth of the Bou Regreg River. They arrived with nothing except a burning hatred of Christian Europe and the seamanship skills they had acquired in the Spanish Mediterranean. They were soon joined by Dutch and English renegades, experienced sailors who had abandoned or been expelled from European navies. Together, they formed one of the most unusual alliances in maritime history, a pirate republic governed by an elected council, operating its own dockyards, maintaining diplomatic envoys, and waging a private war against every Christian nation with a coastline. Their operational range was extraordinary. Salé corsairs struck as far north as England, Ireland, and Iceland, and as far west as the Newfoundland fishing banks. They intercepted merchant vessels across the entire eastern Atlantic. Between 1600 and 1640 alone, an estimated 20,000 European captives were taken and sold into slavery in North African markets. English coastal villages lived in permanent fear. Watchtowers were built along the Cornish and Devon coasts, specifically to spot Salé raiding parties. The English Parliament debated the crisis repeatedly, but could not agree on a response. What made the situation politically unbearable was the secrecy surrounding the ransom system. The English government, unwilling to admit publicly that it could not protect its own citizens, entered into covert negotiations with Salé intermediaries. For nearly 50 years, the Crown paid ransoms through back channels, using merchants and diplomats as middlemen to buy back captured English subjects. Official records from this period are conspicuously sparse. Parliamentary debates reference the payments in coded language. The full scale of the ransoms was never disclosed to the English public. Multiple naval expeditions were launched against Salé, including a major bombardment in 1637 by a combined English fleet. The city was damaged but never taken. The corsairs simply relocated operations upriver, waited for the fleet to withdraw, and resumed raiding within months. It was not until the late 17th century when Morocco's Sultan Moulay Ismail consolidated central authority and absorbed the Salé Republic into his own military apparatus that the corsair threat finally diminished. The pirates were not defeated, they were nationalized. The Salé Rovers operated for over a century as a stateless naval power that held the Atlantic coastline of Europe hostage. They forced the English crown into secret payments it could never publicly acknowledge. They raided territories no one believed reachable. And when they finally disappeared from history, it was not because any navy destroyed them. It was because a king decided their fleet was too valuable to remain independent. The Red Flag Fleet. In 1808, the Qing Emperor dispatched the largest naval force assembled in southern China in over a century. Its mission was to destroy a pirate confederation that had paralyzed shipping across the entire South China Sea. The Imperial fleet tracked the enemy to open water, closed into battle formation, and engaged. When the smoke cleared, roughly half of the Qing Navy lay burning on the surface. The pirates captured dozens of Imperial warships, absorbed their crews, and sailed home without losing a single vessel. The commander who orchestrated this annihilation was not a warlord or a rogue admiral. She was a former sex worker from a floating brothel in Guangdong province. Her name was Shi Xianggu. History remembers her as Qing Shi, and she commanded the most powerful pirate fleet ever recorded. Qing Shi entered the world of piracy through marriage. In 1801, she wed Zheng Yi, an ambitious pirate captain who had spent years consolidating smaller gangs across the South China Sea into a single unified confederation. Together, they negotiated truces between rival pirate factions and organized them under a color-coded flag system. 6 fleets, each flying a different colored banner, red, black, blue, white, yellow, and purple, operated as a coordinated naval force with shared intelligence, defined territories, and strict codes of conduct. At its peak, the Confederation fielded approximately 1,800 warships and between 70,000 and 80,000 fighters. No European navy operating in Asian waters at the time came close to matching those numbers. When Zheng Yi died in 1807, the Confederation faced immediate collapse. Rival captains saw an opportunity to seize power. Qing Shi moved faster than all of them. She secured an alliance with Zhang Bao, her late husband's most capable lieutenant, and declared herself the supreme leader of the Red Flag Fleet, the largest and most powerful squadron in the Confederation. Zhang Bao commanded the ships. Qing Shi commanded Zhang Bao. Imperial intelligence reports from the period state it explicitly. Zhang Bao consulted her on all decisions and acted only with her approval. Her organizational discipline was unprecedented for a pirate force. She implemented a codified legal system governing every aspect of fleet operations. Desertion was punishable by death. Theft from the communal treasury meant execution. Captured towns that cooperated were taxed but left unharmed. Towns that resisted were burned. Every piece of plunder was registered, inspected, and distributed through a centralized system. She ran the Red Flag Fleet not as a pirate gang, but as a floating government with laws stricter than most nations of the era. The Qing dynasty threw everything it had against her. Imperial fleets were defeated repeatedly. The government then turned to foreign powers for help. A joint Chinese-Portuguese naval force attempted to trap her fleet in Tongchung Bay in September 1809. The blockade lasted 3 months. Qing Shi took losses but broke through the encirclement and escaped into open water with her fleet largely intact. Neither the Chinese Empire nor a European colonial navy could destroy her. In 1810, Qing Shi did something no pirate leader before or since has managed. She negotiated her own retirement. Recognizing that the government harassment would never end, she approached Qing officials from a position of strength and dictated her terms. She and her fleet would surrender in exchange for full amnesty, the right to keep a personal flotilla of 24 ships, and no prosecution for any member of her confederation. The Qing, exhausted and humiliated, accepted every condition. Qing Shi walked away from piracy, moved to Macau, opened a gambling house, and lived peacefully until her death in 1844 at the age of 69. She was never captured, never tried, never punished. The most powerful pirate in history retired on her own terms, and the empire that spent years trying to destroy her had no choice but to let her go. The Morgan Buccaneer Armada. In January 1671, a column of nearly 2,000 men emerged from 9 days of marching through dense jungle and swampland on the Isthmus of Panama. They were starving. They had eaten leather satchels and shoe soles to survive. Many were barefoot. Their clothes were rotting off their bodies. Ahead of them lay Panama City, the richest port in the Spanish Americas, a fortified treasury that had never fallen to any foreign attack in over 150 years. The man leading this half-dead army was not a general commissioned by any European crown. He was a Welsh privateer named Henry Morgan, and by nightfall, Panama City would no longer exist. Morgan's rise began in Jamaica in the 1660s, during a period when the English crown quietly encouraged piracy against Spanish colonies, but refused to acknowledge it publicly. England and Spain were officially at peace. Unofficially, the governor of Jamaica, Thomas Modiford, issued letters of marque to Buccaneer captains, granting them legal cover to raid Spanish shipping and settlements in exchange for a share of the profits. It was state-sponsored piracy laundered through diplomatic paperwork, and no one exploited this system more effectively than Henry Morgan. His early raids established a pattern of audacity that bordered on insanity. In 1668, with just 10 ships and 500 men, Morgan attacked Puerto Príncipe in Cuba, then sailed south to assault Portobello, one of Spain's 3 major treasure ports on the Caribbean coast. Portobello was heavily fortified with multiple stone forts and a professional garrison. Morgan landed his men out of sight, approached by canoe under darkness, and stormed the defenses at night. When the third and final fort proved nearly impenetrable, he forced captured monks and nuns to march at the front of his assault columns as human shields. The garrison could not fire on the clergy. Portobello fell. Morgan extracted a ransom of 250,000 pieces of eight before withdrawing. In 1669, he struck Maracaibo and Gibraltar in Venezuela with 8 ships and 650 men. The Spanish Navy trapped his fleet inside Lake Maracaibo, with a squadron of warships blocking the only exit. Morgan converted a captured vessel into a fire ship, packed it with gunpowder and tar, and sailed it directly into the Spanish flagship. The explosion destroyed the squadron. Morgan sailed out unchallenged. But Panama was his masterpiece. By late 1670, Morgan had assembled 36 ships and nearly 2,000 buccaneers of every nationality. He sailed to the mouth of the Chagres River, captured Fort San Lorenzo in a brutal 2-day assault that killed over 100 of his own men, then marched his army overland through the jungle toward the Pacific coast. The governor of Panama had been warned. He deployed Spanish troops along the route and positioned his forces outside the city walls. Morgan's ragged army engaged them on open ground and broke the Spanish line within hours. As his men entered the city, the governor detonated gunpowder barrels placed throughout the largely wooden buildings. Panama City burned for an entire day. Morgan spent 3 weeks picking through the ruins, extracting whatever wealth survived the fires. When word reached London that Morgan had sacked Panama after England and Spain had signed a peace treaty, he was recalled and arrested. The political embarrassment should have ended his career. Instead, relations with Spain deteriorated again, and King Charles II knighted Morgan and sent him back to Jamaica as deputy governor. The pirate who burned the richest city in the Americas was rewarded with a title and a government post. Morgan died in 1688 as a wealthy plantation owner, respected and untouchable. His grave was swallowed by the sea when an earthquake destroyed Port Royal in 1692. The ocean buried the evidence, but the question remains. When the Crown issues the orders, funds the ships, and shares the profits, who exactly is the pirate? The Victual Brothers. In 1394, maritime trade across the entire Baltic Sea collapsed. Not gradually, not seasonally, completely. The herring fleets that fed half of northern Europe could not sail. Merchant convoys that connected the great Hanseatic trading cities from Lubeck to Novgorod were intercepted so frequently that insurers refused to cover any vessel entering Baltic waters. The price of salt herring, the staple protein of the European working class during Lent, increased tenfold as far inland as Frankfurt. Fishermen abandoned the Scanian markets entirely. For 3 consecutive years, one of the most critical food supply chains in medieval Europe was shut down by a pirate brotherhood that had started as a government contract. The Victual Brothers were born from war. In 1392, the Dukes of Mecklenburg hired a loose guild of privateers to break the Danish blockade of Stockholm during the conflict between Queen Margaret I of Denmark and King Albert of Sweden. Their mission was simple: run supplies through the blockade and keep Stockholm fed. The name came from the Latin word victualia, meaning provisions. They were paid not in gold, but in plunder rights. Anything they seized from Danish shipping was theirs to keep. It was a standard wartime privateer arrangement. What no one anticipated was what happened when the war ended. The Peace Treaty of 1395 dissolved their legal mandate overnight. The Dukes of Mecklenburg withdrew their sponsorship, but the Victual Brothers had spent 3 years building a fleet, recruiting experienced sailors from every port in the North Sea and Baltic, and establishing fortified bases across the region. They had no intention of going home. With safe harbors in Rostock, Wismar, and Stralsund, and the full island of Gotland as their headquarters, the Victual Brothers turned from privateers into the most organized pirate force Northern Europe had ever encountered. Their battle cry became legendary: God's friends and the whole world's enemies. They attacked indiscriminately: Danish ships, Hanseatic merchants, English traders, Russian convoys. No flag offered protection. They sacked the Norwegian city of Bergen in 1393. They seized Malmö in 1394. They occupied parts of Frisia and Schleswig. Queen Margaret of Denmark, who had united 3 Scandinavian kingdoms into the Kalmar Union, was so desperate that she petitioned King Richard II of England for permission to hire English warships to fight the pirates. The Hanseatic League, the most powerful commercial alliance in Europe, could not secure its own trade routes. The turning point came when the Teutonic Knights, one of the most formidable military orders in medieval Europe, launched a full-scale invasion of Gotland in 1398. An armada of 84 ships carrying 4,000 soldiers landed on the island and destroyed the pirate stronghold at Visby. The Victual Brothers were driven from the Baltic, but they did not disappear. They scattered to the North Sea coast, regrouped under a new name, the like dealers, meaning equal sharers, and continued raiding for another 4 decades. Their most famous captain was Klaus Störtebeker, a man whose legend grew so large that he became the Robin Hood of northern Germany. According to folklore, he could drain a 4-liter mug of beer in a single swallow. He was captured off Heligoland around 1400 and beheaded in Hamburg alongside approximately 70 of his crew. But execution did not end the Brotherhood. Remnants of the like dealers attacked and burned Bergen to the ground as late as 1429. Maritime trade in both the North Sea and the Baltic remained under threat until the 1440s. The Victual Brothers were hired for one war and fought for 50 years. They were created by a government that needed them, then abandoned by the same government when peace was signed. And the lesson they left behind was simple. Once you arm men, give them ships, and teach them that the sea belongs to whoever is strong enough to take it. No peace treaty on earth will make them stop. The Narentine Sea Wolves. In 846 CE, a fleet of shallow-draft raiding ships appeared within sight of the Venetian lagoon itself. The attackers struck the nearby town of Caorle, seized merchant vessels at anchor, captured their crews, and withdrew before the Venetian navy could mobilize a response. The raid was not conducted by Vikings, though the tactics were nearly identical. The attackers were Slavic pirates operating from the mouth of the Neretva River on the Dalmatian coast, over 300 miles southeast of Venice. They had crossed the entire length of the Adriatic Sea, raided the doorstep of the most powerful maritime republic in the Mediterranean, and escaped without a single loss. The Venetians called them Narentines. For the next 150 years, these pirates would dictate the terms of Adriatic commerce, and the mighty Republic of Venice would pay them tribute for the privilege of sailing in its own waters. The Narentines were a South Slavic tribe that settled along the Neretva River Delta during the Great Slavic migrations of the 7th century. The territory they occupied was perfectly suited for piracy. The Dalmatian coastline offered hundreds of hidden coves, narrow inlets, and rocky islands where small ships could vanish within minutes of an attack. The Narentines exploited this geography with devastating efficiency. Their primary vessel was the Sagina, a sleek warship fitted with up to 15 oars on each side, and rigged with triangular sails for speed. It was fast, shallow-drafted, and small enough to conceal in coastal caves. Byzantine sources referred to the Narentines as pagans, the last Christianized people in the region, which only deepened their fearsome reputation among the Catholic Venetians. Their raiding was not seasonal or opportunistic. It was systematic. The Narentines tracked Venetian trade schedules with precision, timing their attacks to coincide with major religious holidays when merchant convoys were most heavily loaded and least well defended. They seized cargo, enslaved crews, and extracted tribute from isolated Venetian coastal settlements. Any town that refused to pay was burned. Any ship that resisted was taken. The Adriatic Sea, Venice's lifeline to Constantinople and the lucrative eastern trade routes, became a gauntlet that no merchant vessel could cross without risking capture. Venice responded with force repeatedly and failed repeatedly. In 887 CE, a Venetian war fleet engaged the Narentines near Makarska in one of the most significant naval battles in early Adriatic history. The Venetians lost. The defeat was so humiliating that Venice was forced to negotiate a formal tribute arrangement. For over a century, the Republic of Venice, the dominant naval power of the medieval Mediterranean, paid the Narentines regular payments in exchange for safe passage through the Adriatic. The greatest trading empire in Europe was buying permission to sail from a tribe of coastal raiders who numbered in the low thousands. Multiple Venetian doges attempted to break Narentine power through military campaigns. Each time, the pirates retreated into their labyrinth of islands and river channels, waited for the Venetian fleet to exhaust its supplies, and resumed operations within months. It was not until 998 CE that Doge Pietro II Orseolo launched a comprehensive campaign down the entire eastern Adriatic coast, capturing Narentine strongholds one by one. The final pirate haven, the island of Lastovo, was so notorious that the Doge ordered it completely evacuated and razed. The Narentine threat was broken, but not before it had shaped Venetian naval strategy for generations. The Narentines never commanded thousands of ships. They never fielded armies of tens of thousands. But for over 150 years, a small Slavic tribe operating from river caves and rocky islands held the most powerful maritime republic in Europe hostage, forced it to pay tribute, defeated its navy in open battle, and raided within sight of Venice itself. Empires are not always brought to their knees by superior numbers. Sometimes a shallow draft ship and an intimate knowledge of the coastline is enough. The Illyrian Pirate Kingdom. In 231 BCE, Rome sent two ambassadors across the Adriatic Sea to the court of the Illyrian kingdom. Their mission was diplomatic. The Senate demanded that Queen Tuta, who had recently inherited the throne, restrain the pirate fleets that were destroying Roman merchant shipping throughout the Adriatic and Ionian seas. Tuta listened to their demands. Then she had one of the ambassadors killed. The other was sent back to Rome with a message. Piracy, the queen informed the Senate, was not a crime under Illyrian law. It was a legitimate enterprise of the state. Rome had just been told, to its face, that an entire kingdom operated as a pirate fleet, and the Senate had no idea what it had provoked. The Illyrian kingdom occupied the eastern Adriatic coastline, stretching across what is now Albania, Montenegro, and Croatia. Its geography was a pirate's paradise. Thousands of islands, hidden bays, and narrow channels created an infinite network of ambush points and escape routes. Illyrian sailors had exploited these waters for generations, but piracy had always been a local affair. Small raids on passing merchant vessels, quick strikes, and retreats. Under Teuta's predecessor, King Agron, the strategy changed. Agron consolidated the Illyrian tribal fleets into a unified naval force and deployed them as instruments of state policy. Piracy was no longer a criminal sideline. It was national economics. When Teuta took the throne after Agron's death, she did not simply continue his policies. She escalated them. She released the entire Illyrian fleet into the Adriatic with a single directive: plunder any non-Illyrian vessel on sight. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for Mediterranean commerce. Greek trading cities along the western coast appealed to their allies for protection. Roman merchants reported losses so severe that trade routes through the Adriatic became functionally unusable. The island of Pharos and the port of Vis, both critical stops for Roman commercial shipping, were raided so frequently that merchants abandoned them entirely. Teuta's pirates did not limit themselves to sea raids. They besieged and captured the Greek colony of Phenice, one of the wealthiest cities in Epirus. They occupied the island of Corcyra, modern-day Corfu, a strategic gateway between the Adriatic and the Ionian Sea. Each conquest expanded the Illyrian pirate state's territorial control and tightened its stranglehold on maritime commerce. The Adriatic was no longer a shared waterway. It was an Illyrian toll road, and every ship that entered paid in cargo, crew, or blood. Rome's response was the First Illyrian War of 229 to 228 BCE. The Senate dispatched a fleet of 200 warships and an army of 20,000 soldiers under Consul Lucius Postumius Albinus. It was the first time in Roman history that a major military force had been deployed across the Adriatic. The Romans expected a quick suppression campaign. What they found was a coastline designed for guerrilla warfare, where Illyrian ships vanished into channels too narrow for Roman triremes to follow. Rome eventually prevailed, but only after Demetrius of Pharos, one of Teuda's own governors, betrayed her in exchange for Roman backing. Teuda was forced to accept punishing peace terms. Her fleet was restricted, her territory was reduced. Heavy limitations were imposed on where Illyrian ships could sail. But the pattern repeated. Demetrius, now a Roman client ruler, rebuilt the pirate fleet and resumed raiding the moment Rome's attention shifted elsewhere. After his defeat, King Gentius pursued the exact same strategy, launching pirate operations against Roman shipping until Rome finally conquered Illyria entirely in 168 BCE. 3 consecutive rulers, 3 consecutive pirate wars. The Romans had to invade the same coastline 3 times before the threat was permanently eliminated. The Illyrian pirate wars are rarely taught as a turning point in Roman history, but they should be. They drew Rome across the Adriatic for the first time, planting the military footprint that would eventually lead to the conquest of Greece, Macedonia, and the entire eastern Mediterranean. An empire that would dominate the known world for centuries took its first steps eastward not to spread civilization or defeat a rival superpower, but because a pirate queen killed an ambassador and dared Rome to do something about it. Conclusion: these 10 fleets reveal a pattern that no empire has ever been willing to acknowledge. Across 3 millennia, from the ancient Mediterranean to the South China Sea, from the frozen shores of Iceland to the jungles of Panama, the most dangerous naval forces in history were not built by governments. They were built by the people governments abandoned, criminalized, or refused to recognize. And in every case, the response was not understanding. It was erasure. The mechanism repeats with disturbing precision. Empires create the conditions for piracy through trade bans, forced exile, economic collapse, or wartime contracts they never intend to honor. When the pirates become too powerful to ignore, the same empires deploy overwhelming military force, not to solve the underlying problem, but to eliminate the evidence that the problem ever existed. The Ming Dynasty criminalized its own merchants and then labeled them foreign invaders when they fought back. The Dukes of Mecklenburg armed the Victual Brothers for war, then disavowed them the moment peace was signed. England funded Henry Morgan's raids, shared his profits, then arrested him when the political winds shifted, only to knight him when they shifted again. The Ottoman Empire absorbed the Barbarossa fleet not because it defeated the pirates, but because it recognized their navy was too valuable to destroy. Every empire in this list followed the same script: use them, deny them, erase them. The cost of this cycle extends far beyond the battles themselves. The Qing dynasty's great clearance displaced millions of civilians to deny the Zheng fleet a coastline. The Ming Haijin ban destroyed China's merchant class for generations. Venice paid tribute to a small Slavic tribe for over a century, rather than admit its navy could not secure its own waters. England conducted secret ransom payments to the Salé Rovers for 50 years, while publicly pretending the threat did not exist. These were not military failures. They were deliberate choices to sacrifice entire populations and economies, rather than confront the reality that the line between piracy and statecraft was never more than a flag and a signature. That line remains blurred today. Private military contractors operate warships in contested waters. State-sponsored cyber operations target commercial infrastructure using the same logic Teuda articulated 23 centuries ago. If the state authorizes it, it is not a crime. The flags have changed, the tactics have evolved, but the fundamental question these 10 fleets posed has never been answered. The real mystery is not how pirates built fleets powerful enough to challenge empires. The real mystery is why every empire, after defeating them, worked so hard to make sure the world forgot they ever existed. History is not written by the victors. It is written by whoever controls the archive. And the archive has always been selective about which enemies deserve to be remembered, and which were too dangerous to be anything but erased.